To start by asking Landon to please introduce yourself.
Well, thank you, Karen. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Landon Brown, and I am the current representative for Wyoming House District 9, which serves the majority of Buffalo Ridge and East and Northeast Cheyenne proper. I've been in the legislature since 2017 and serve on the Education and Transportation Military Affairs committees as the chairman of the latter.
Thank you. Well, let's get into the questions then. What specific policies or reforms do you think Wyoming could effectively implement to reduce healthcare costs for the uninsured and underinsured?
Absolutely. Karen, I don't think it's any surprise to anybody who would be watching this interview that I have been a champion for Medicaid expansion since day one. While it was wildly unpopular at the very beginning and the very onset of the expansion of Medicaid, it has served to be a very valuable tool for smaller states with sparse populations such as ourselves, Montana, North Dakota, some of those. I think it's a very, very important concept for us to consider. And I do think that it's important for Wyomingites to get some of those tax dollars that we send back to Washington, D.C., back to take care of the people here in our state. Secondly, I think that we've done a great job on this issue already by going after some of the things that we've already done in the legislature. And I think it's important to highlight those. And one of those is some of the practice acts, some of the insurance practice acts that we've gone in and fixed. And I think one of the biggest issues that we've done in the past 2 years was the collaborative care model. And that was something that was not originally covered underneath insurance practices throughout the state. And so that really goes underneath that underinsured population as opposed to uninsured. So I think those are two areas that we've already started on. I do think that the voice of over 60% of Wyomingites is critical to recognize that Medicaid expansion is not as bad as it sounds. And it would actually really help our rural hospitals and make sure that our rural communities have affordable health care at all times now.
Thank you. And let's go on to our next question. What accountability and performance measurement standards should be required for all schools, public, private, and charter?
That's a great question, Karen. And I think, beyond a few of the other people in the legislature, I think I may be a little more qualified than most to answer this as being the longest serving member of the Education Committee now. Been on there all 8 years. And one of the things that I think that we need to do is to ensure that all schools are graded and all schools are held to the same accountability standards. I was actually the chairman of both the voucher bill that went through the legislature last year and worked to make sure that we got that through, as well as the charter school bill 2 years ago. Myself and Speaker Summers worked diligently to make sure that we got that charter school bill through the finish line. And one of the things that we did in both of those bills was ensure that the accountability standards that we hold our K through 12 public schools to are also kept inside of our private schools as well as the charter schools across the board. And so we want to make sure that every single school that receives a single tax dollar is held to the same accountability standards. And we already have that in statute. And I think that that's a very good model that we have worked on for many years. And I think before we go changing anything, we should absolutely take a look at what that has to offer for us.
Okay, thanks. Now I'm going to give you a flash feedback. Flash feedback is a term or a word, and you have 30 seconds to kind of give us a quick overview of your thoughts. And for you, the word or term is digital infrastructure.
Digital infrastructure is an interesting one, especially here in the Cheyenne, Laramie County region. We have certainly had an increase in the amount of data centers coming into here. And as Laramie County's largest property taxpayers, I think it's incredibly important for us to maintain that infrastructure coming in. So that means everything from your infrastructure like roads and water and all that, but also our to the communities that are outside of Laramie County. That means things like fiber optic cable and digital internet across the state.
Okay, thank you. And next question number 3. What infrastructure investments do you think are necessary to support the state's long-term economic growth?
As far as infrastructure goes, I think it's important for us to maintain the assets that we currently have. I think that's one of the largest pieces that we fail to recognize, is that if we don't take care of what we do have already, it becomes increasingly harder to take care of new assets when we start building them out. Of course, you're going to have roads, you're going to have sewer, you're going to have water. And I think one of the most important for us here in the state is water. And we have to make sure that we maintain our water rights and make sure that we are delegating those water rights correctly and we're not fighting across those, especially with this Colorado River Compact coming forward. I think one of the more important things about this discussion, though, is diversifying our tax base. I think diversifying our tax base as opposed to quote unquote diversifying our economy is far more important. It's very well known and very well proven that if we don't bring in an extractive industry job into the state, it actually costs our state as opposed to bringing revenue in. And so what we need to do is broaden and lower our tax base, which would mean a reduction in income to the state, but it would actually reduce those sine waves of the peaks and the valleys when we have good times and bad times. It would reduce those from being so counteropposed to each other. And so it's one of my biggest focuses over the next 2 years, is to really work with our revenue committee to see what we can do about addressing those issues and making sure that we have a more stable tax climate so we can invest not only in our current assets, but as well as our future assets as well.
Thank you. And then our last question is, how would you engage in constructive dialogue with those who have opposing views?
Karen, I think this is probably the most important question of the entire interview. As I read through these questions as they came through, this is one of those areas that I personally pride myself on. Myself and Representative Penn out of the Fremont County area off of the Wind River Indian Reservation, we worked diligently to make one of the bills that I adamantly opposed at the time a better bill and something that I could actually support as we went through. And the only way to do that is with open lines of communication between people who have opposing points of view, and also recognize that compromise is not a bad word. Unfortunately, we do have some people out there that believe in the term no compromise. I am much more in the ideology that we need to be able to walk away with the table for something to eat for everybody, as opposed to one group of the people getting more to eat and nobody getting anything on the other side. That's just not the way that we like to see policy work done. So in my opinion, I will continue to do what I have always done, which is always be willing to open my ears to listen. And I will always ensure that I take every single piece of feedback that I get to try to make sure that we're making good policy, regardless of my personal beliefs, that those good pieces of policy are put in for others that may not believe the way I do.
Thank you. Those were great comments, and I appreciate your insight into these issues. We're ready for you to do some closing remarks and kind of just talk about what do you hope to achieve, what's the greatest strength you bring, how would you promote civility, and why should voters choose you?
Well, Karen, I appreciate it, and I appreciate the time. And as always, I appreciate the League of Women Voters here in Cheyenne. You guys always do a phenomenal job of putting together these forums. And back in my very first time around, there were actually debates, and I think those were really, really well done as well. One of the first things that I would like to say is what I hope to achieve, I've already mentioned, is a more stable tax climate that would be more inviting for more businesses to come to the state. And it would also reduce our necessary need to rely on our tax giants that we have right now, coal, oil, and natural gas. They're already hurting in many cases, and I would like to lighten the burden on them. My greatest strength as I've come into the legislature, I'm working on my 5th term now for 9 and 10 years, is the fact that I do have the experience. I do know how to make those compromises, and I do know how to ensure that my citizens, my constituents' voices are heard on a daily basis. I am willing to compromise, and I think that that is something that you don't see from a lot of other people, and I think that's probably one of the biggest strengths that I'm going to have as well. Promoting civility is, again, one of the largest things that I recognize as the biggest benefit for getting a piece of work done. Moving a bill through 3 different readings and in 2 different houses, as well as committee hearings, is not an easy feat. And the only way you can do that is by making friends, even when you disagree with one another. So, I've been able to move a lot of bills through the legislature, and some of the more impactful ones to some of those like firefighters. carry that weight only because of the relationships that I've been willing to build and those bridges that I've been willing to build. And then the last thing that I would say, Karen, why choose me over the others? I believe I represent my constituents very well. I grew up in House District 9. I've lived here for 35 out of my 38 years living in Wyoming. And I truly do believe that the people I represent are the same neighbors that I had when I was 9 or 10 years old running around in the streets of this district. I hear, I respond, and I value every single piece of feedback that I get. And I think every single constituent that would say that they've reached out to me would also echo those sentiments, that I am never afraid to reach back out, hear what they have to say, and take their voices forward. It's an unfortunate situation that my opponent has said the exact opposite. In the 8 years that I've been running for this position, I have never heard a single word from my opponent, and he claims that I have never been a good representative for him. What I would say is that ultimately relies on the person and the individual to reach back out to me and let their voices be heard, because I will always ensure that their voices are met with a representation that is adequate on the House floor.
Thank you so much, Representative Landon Brown.